Welcome back. So today we are going to talk about THIEAUDIO's Clairvoyance, and I'm not sure the world needs another Claire is awesome review, but we'll step through this one quite quickly because I think there's lots of good reviews on it, and all of them are pretty much in line with what I'm going to say. So we'll walk through it kind of quickly. So for those of you who haven't had a close-up look at it, this is Clairvoyance, and this is the older original version, and you can tell by this nozzle, which is a bit short. It doesn't have a lip, so I think some people do find that a little off-putting, a little different. They're expecting more of a lip there, and there wasn't one. It's a bit short. It's a bit shallow fit. The shell itself is actually kind of chunky, so I think this one does definitely fits better in the bigger ears, and people who couldn't get this one to fit in their ears are going to have either sound problems, not enough bass, or it's just going to be super uncomfortable. But for me, not bad. It kind of fits in my big ears, and I didn't really have any problems with the fit, but I certainly understand if people couldn't get that one to fit in that size shell all that well for them. So pop this one in my ears. Sounds like kind of this warm, safe tuning, very polished. It's got 1DD, 5BA, 2 ESTs, so very high quality drivers, high quality tuning. It just sounds polished. They put pin gain at 2.5K, and it gives vocals that nice energy without any additional fatigue. So it wasn't all that shocking that I love this tuning, and I kind of love Claire as much as everyone else. So if we take a look at the graph, and I think Critical's graph actually shows closer to what I hear as opposed to my graph, and I have both of these graphs on my side as well. But the gist of why I sort of like this tuning and like this set a whole lot is because it's very, very close to Shower's EG07M. So, probably my favorite set, and Claire is almost a carbon copy of it, except for two kind of very small details. So I do think that Claire's bass is slightly elevated over M, and M is already elevated over the original EJ07. So I prefer M because I like a little more bass. I think Clairvoyance, probably it's a hair above where I would be, where I want it to be, because I prefer where M is, but I do think it is a step above M. And then the same thing on the treble. It's sort of a hair above what M is, and M is above the original on treble as well. So it's sort of an M plus is how I would describe it. So the middle is pretty much all the same, but you just get an additional bump on either side. So there wasn't really too much of a doubt that I was going to love this set because it is so close to M. So yeah, not too shocking on that. So I think there is a big stage, and I know some people had problems getting it to fit. If it's not really sitting in your ear deep enough, I think the stage and the treble, I think a bunch of things sound weird with it. But I do think kind of when you get this thing to fit in your ear right, there is a big stage and lots of separation, and the shells are a bit chunky with a short nozzle. You definitely have to get it deeper in there. Foam does work, but you do have to watch that treble and detail level to maintain that separation. So yeah, I think there's just kind of a cascade of problems happen when you couldn't get the fit right, and I certainly understand when people bought it, didn't like it, and sold it. And I think a lot of it happened to do with the fit and that short nozzle and the chunky shell, but when you get the fit, it actually sounds quite great. So the sound, like I said, it's kind of a warm, relaxed, neutralish, bass-boosted neutral. So definitely a bass-boosted, nice elevation there, and kind of really close to Critical's neutral there, maybe a little bit under, but I wouldn't say it's boosted all that much in the treble at all. So the bass, and considering that the sister Monarch was the one that had the more sub bass, I was kind of shocked about how much sub bass was actually there in Claire. Kind of right off the bat, it will rumble like thunder when it's needed, but not all the time. It kind of reserved and it's controlled, but when you hear a rumble, it's like, well, that's a whole lot of bass. And that's why I said it. To me, just generally, I think the bass level is above M. And the first time I heard it, and why I put that up here, is the first thing I noticed about Claire was the bass. And then you notice the mids that are actually quite similar to M. But on M, when I listen to M, the first thing I notice are the mids and then the bass. So I think Claire did sort of mess with the recipe a little bit and does switch it up a little bit. And I think it's just a hair more bass forward than M is. And I think it was noticeable the first time I listened to Claire. So yeah, the bass is quite strong and it will rumble pretty hard. It's definitely a slight bit more tactile than M. It just feels a little stronger. It kind of hits you a little harder, and that wasn't really a strong point on M either. It's got this very much in line, perfectly tuned, very smooth curve from the bass all the way to the treble. Nothing pops out of line, and I think Claire does bump that recipe a little bit, and it's a little more harder hitting. It's a little thicker. But I would say that M is probably a little bit more detailed, and I think that's just strictly a tuning level difference. I think if you tune it a little back, you can hear more detail, and I think that's what I hear in M. So Claire is more fun, more satisfying. It's definitely a little thicker, but I'd be pretty fine with a bit less of the bass, especially the mid bass on a track like I Can See Clearly Now by the Holly Cole Trio. It's just slightly distracting, and again, I talked to this part about the mids and the bass, and M is very much a mid-centric set, and everything is slightly below the mids. Her vocals should be front and center. It should be your number one priority, and then on Claire, there's just a little bass there. So I think it works a little better on pop, more bass-forward songs. M is still kind of my favorite mid style with a song like that, with just a vocalist and another instrument or two. I think M kind of knocks it out of the park on that style. So the mids, like I said, a grass almost identical to M. They're pretty much right on top of each other, and the real difference is how they rise. And M is just a little more in line. Nothing really pops out of place. It's kind of this perfect slope. And Claire just adds a little more energy, a little more liveliness, but very, 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 very close. So I'll give it the slight personal edge to M just because that is my set and kind of my personal favorite. But the mids in isolation, I think they are very super close, and I just prefer the presentation better on M. You're kind of splitting hairs at that point. Claire rises a bit more in the upper mid, like I said. It is a bit nice to have a little more energy right there. Claire also sounds a bit thicker behind the mids. So when you hear the mids and some instrument behind it, the whole thing sounds quite thick and thicker than M does. But I think when you listen to M's, just the vocals alone, I think they are a little bit richer, not necessarily thicker. I think that's kind of the wrong word. I think there's just a little more detail to it, a little more texture to it than what you get with Claire, and it's just kind of this hairline difference between the two. And I would say that both of them are just shades of great mids. It's just, very, very close to each other. But like I said, be really careful with your tips and make sure you are preserving all that detail and clarity in the mids because it's very much tip sensitive. So treble, I do prefer a relaxed treble, and I think it is done quite well here. Just slightly elevated over the M levels, and especially in that 5 to 8K area, you'll hear snares kind of pop out a little more than they do on M, just a bit more energy, and you can still turn it up quite a bit, but not quite to M levels, and you get a song like, this famous test track, Bird on a Wire by Jennifer Warnes. It's all, pretty much identical to M until you get to the last 30 seconds, and the drums kick in, and you're like, oh, okay, my volume's just a bit too high for Claire, but, really, really just nitpicking there. Both of the trebles are actually quite fine. I just prefer a little more relaxed, and this one's just a slightly elevated over M, but both of them are just, top-notch quality drivers, top-notch tuning, very polished. There's no real peaks. It's just everything is all polished and tuned, high-quality drivers, and you could hear that, and that's why this thing costs $700. So Foam Tips definitely will take this one to an even more relaxed level, and maybe you prefer that, maybe not, but do pay attention to it because it will knock it back quite a bit. So stage, again, like I said, it's quite spacious. There's great imaging, and there's nice height, and it has a nice forward depth, and I think M is probably a little better in that respect. It's probably a little more immersive in 3D. This one has really nice forward projection though. But, again, I'm not really sure if it's just tip dependent. There's some oddity there where people were complaining that the stage wasn't as big as it should be. Because when I hear it, the first thing I noticed was it sounds quite big and spacious. And it also does a really great job at maintaining stage, which is harder for some, especially lesser, more affordable sets. They tend to, you kind of get this stage out front, and then you'll hear instruments snap to your ears, and it kind of breaks that illusion. And I think Claire did a really top-notch job of always maintaining this, sense of stage and performers in front of you, as opposed to breaking that illusion. So yeah, it's kind of top notch right there on some of the stage presentation on Claire. So that's it. 10 minutes on Claire. Like I said, no real surprises. It's a great set, great drivers, great tuning, very much in line with something that is aligned with my preferences. So yeah, not too many surprises with this one. So thank you again for tuning in, and I will see you next time.